Gabe, in the news this week, I shouldn't say this week because I don't want to tell people when we film these episodes, but in the news this week, the FCC, one of the commissioners, looks like he wants to remove TikTok from Apple and Google Play. So, it got me thinking of what I could do with all that time back in my life. But Gabe, is that a big impact on your life?
Not an impact on my life, but I did see it yesterday, and I texted that video to you immediately and said almost that exact same joke, which was, I'm sorry, but think about all of the time that you're going to get back in your life. So,
oh man, I'm already
this is going to be a sad day for you if TikTok. I know it's going to be a sad day if TikTok actually does get taken out of the App Store, but the cynical part of me goes, I wonder what kind of giant pile of cash Mark Zuckerberg dropped off at the FCC chairman's house or commissioner's house to try and get him to remove TikTok from the apps, the Apple and Google Play stores.
This is how conspiracy theories get started. We talk about them on the podcast, and then next thing we know. But no, I think it's pretty funny because we've talked about Instagram. We talked about TikTok a lot, too, but we've talked about Instagram and kind of the alternative, But I'm not quite ready for TikTok to go away. If it goes away, I'll find something else to do to waste my time on. But I still think short form video is not going away. So don't be distracted by TikTok going away.
No, short form video is not going away. Short form vertical video is here for a while until we figure out what our next thing is that's going to, ruin all of our free time. But it is interesting. The next
thing to waste time on.
Yeah, exactly. The next thing to waste time on. But did you hear the reasons why they're concerned and wanting to take it away? Because it is kind of crazy.
I believe it was a lot of that data sharing Chinese kind of background. Is that the same reason? Because that was the case. I think it was last year when this discussion happened.
Yeah, it's a lot of that same overall theme, right? Of we don't we don't want China to getting our data, but the type of information that they were gathering in the background of the app is kind of insane. And what is the
information? Because I didn't actually read that part.
It was, pulling information about what other, what other things you engaged with, right? What other websites you visited, your location data. I mean, there's lots of information that was being gathered and sent back. And the other big distinction that they've been trying to make is TikTok is saying, well, no, all of this data just lives on servers in the US, on cloud servers in the US. And it turns out that that's actually not true, that a lot of the data does get pushed back to China. And now TikTok's saying, well, yeah, it does, but there's only certain people at the company that have access to it. And it's on a need to know, to use my air quotes here, need to know basis. But what does that mean, right? Who's in the need to know group versus who's not? So I don't know. I'm not actually a conspiracy guy. So, I don't, and I feel like when we're using these apps, we've sort of made the decision that our data and privacy is probably gone at this point, but it is an interesting
opt-in feature, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah, totally. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I don't think it'll actually get taken down, but it is an interesting conversation.
I don't think so. TikTok is one of those apps that if you download it, you know what you're getting into. If you really value privacy, it's not like Facebook, is keeping your data safe too. But if you really value privacy,
yeah, so true.
This is my opinion, but I think a lot of it relies on the consumer of knowing what app you're downloading and sharing and that information. How TikTok handles that data, though, that's a separate question. But enough about TikTok, Gabe. Last week, I was out traveling. You had a fantastic episode with Kat on the Success team as well. So if anyone hasn't listened to that episode, I highly recommend going out and listening to that. It was so good. I was worried I would be replaced this week. So I'm happy to be back with you, Gabe. But I think I can say that Kat might be my favorite guest host that we've had. She might be the only guest host, but she can be the favorite guest host. But definitely go back and listen to that website. But there was one thing you guys talked about, and it made me kind of want to talk about it in depth a little bit and add some context around it. But you guys talked about some tools you can use on websites. And that kind of got me thinking, And there's a question that always, I see it online all the time, and it's basically, how often should I be redesigning my website? Or what does that time frame look like? And you made the comment today. You said, well, if you're asking that question, it's overdue. It's time. So I really wanted to dive into that discussion a little bit today and talk about, what you should be doing before you even begin this process, how you should begin this process, and really what you can walk through when doing a website redesign, just to make sure everything's optimized and the actual project itself takes off. So number one thing, Gabe, is you and I talk about knowing your data all the time, but before
Mm-hmm.
you do this website redesign, I think one of the big things people forget is to know your data. What pages are people visiting? How often do they go to a specific page? What are your SEO rankings, submissions, if you have contact forms on your website? But I think knowing all of this data really paints a big picture of really how people are using your website. And this is data that's pretty high level. Everyone should have some kind of analytics on this information. You don't have to go all the way in depth, as we'll talk about Hotjar here in a bit, but you don't have to go
Mm-hmm.
that deep immediately if you don't have access to that data. But knowing what pages people visit and how they interact with your site, that's really step one. Before you even begin the process, it's understanding how people engage with your website.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I mean, obviously Google Analytics is sort of the, gold standard for this just because it's free, it's relatively easy to set up, and, it's accessible to really everybody. So yeah, 100% agree with you there. One of the tools that I really like in Google Analytics, besides just all of the stuff that you talked about, what pages are actually getting visited, what are the most popular pages, how are people getting there, all that good stuff. But I love the have you spent much time looking at the behavior flow analysis in Google Analytics?
A little bit, yes.
I love behavior flow. It's so interesting because what it does is it shows you a really cool visualization of, and I'm obviously a total sucker for cool visuals, but and cool charts and graphs, but it shows you basically the flow of how users are navigating around on your website. So if they came in from your main page, then what pages did they go to from there? If they came in on another page, what other pages did they go to? And not only the first level, but you can break it down into multiple levels of how far did it go? How far did they go before they fell off? And really start to get a better understanding of, I think, the usability of your site. I just love that visualization
One
so
thing
much.
I
I think
like
it's super
about
cool.
that, Gabe, is it really tells you how many clicks are my users taking to get to a page. So you can look at your page
Yes.
rankings again and say, hey, if everyone's going to my um, contact us page, or whatever page it may be,
Mm-hmm.
maybe make that page more visible on your navigation, or bring it so it's easier to navigate. So keep an eye on those clicks. I don't know what the actual number is, but I feel like for the most part, I've always been told, like, if someone's looking for a page on your website, it should be done in 1 to 3 clicks. You don't want to send them down a
Yes.
rabbit hole and just be lost. So keep that in mind too. Is understand how people interact with your website before you even tackle the project. And
Mm-hmm.
we'll get
Yeah,
to what
absolutely.
that timeline looks like on how often you redesign your website here in a few minutes. But just looking ahead a little bit too, is the next thing before you begin the project is to understand your goals. That's really the why am I doing this? Because you really don't want to redesign your website just because the design is out of date. I mean, it's still a good reason, but in addition to
Mm-hmm.
that, you need to understand, why do I want to tackle this project? Is it just to redesign it, or is there something more I can do? And again, this is when you can focus on that same data. Who's visiting my website? How much time are they spending on my website? Are they submitting that form data again? But just understand how people are engaging with your site, and then take that into account when you establish goals on what you want to accomplish. Do you want to drive people to spend more time on your site? Do you want to drive them to do something specific on your site? Whatever that may be, that's really the next step on this planning phase.
Agreed. It's a great point. And yeah, really think about what that end goal is in mind. Is this intended to be an educational site where you just want people coming and clicking around and reading content? Or is it something that's really looking to drive conversions? Zach, obviously we work in the broadband service provider industry. And, that's one thing that I see a lot with broadband service providers is there's a lot of opportunity for improvement on driving conversions from the website. And there are certainly challenges that can come up there. There's potentially backend integration that they need to do with billing systems and things like that. So setting those complexities aside, but oftentimes their websites are often too informational and not enough direct calls to action around the thing that you really want people to do, whether it's sign up for a service, sign up for a new service, sign up for an additional service, make some conversion. There's just not enough of those calls to action that are really trying to drive those specific conversions, if that's your goal.
Oh man, Gabe, that reminds me of one of my biggest pet peeves is websites that are text heavy, walls of text explaining something, whatever that text is. But the last website redesign project I did, it was in a bank. So just about every feature in online banking had a description next to it, like on what it did. Like you'd click on transfer and like there'd be this giant paragraph saying like, this is what transferring does. This is how to do it. And I'm like, if someone's clicking that button, you would hope they know what the transfer button does. But every single object on this website had a description. And I'm like, well, this is just a terrible user experience, unless you're like brand new to banking, or, you're 120 years old and have never used a computer. Like it's just too complicated. So don't be this text heavy website. Have those visuals, have those call to actions, and simplify that user experience down. So if your user experience is so complicated that everything needs a description, you've made a mistake. You've made a mistake already.
It's a great point.
And speaking of this website redesign, one of the things I did when I began this design is I went on and I said, what is my competition doing? And then from that point, again, this was a bank. So then from this point, I went, what are the national banks doing? What is a credit union a state away doing? What do people do in this industry? And that's one of the big takeaways is I went around to all these different sites and I saw something like, oh man, I really like that. I would take a note of that. And then when I came back to the actual design phase, you don't want to go ahead and explicitly copy someone's website or just copy and paste from their site. But if you do see something you like, take a note of it. If there's something you don't like, make a note of that too. But just see what everyone else, especially your competitors, are doing in their websites. Gabe, we see this a lot in the broadband industry, working with our customers every day. Maybe one of the big national providers does something cool. We'll take a note of that and we'll share it with our customers too, and kind of adapt that into that small local feel. So that's one way is to just look at that, look at your competitors, see what they are doing, and really, adapt your strategy to. If there's something you like, again, just make note of that. Don't copy, but see how you can adapt it into your website.
Yeah, let's not copy and paste. We talked about copy and pasting on a couple episodes ago, Zach, where we were talking about creating content. And, I'm fine with copying and pasting your own content and putting it in multiple places. Don't want to copy and paste from your competitors' websites and put it onto yours. But using it as inspiration, absolutely. I think that's totally fine. And looking at how they're framing up the value prop for their customers. And if you feel like that's a good way to do it, then maybe use that as a little bit of inspiration. I'll give you a really specific example that from stuff I was looking at just over the past couple of weeks for some competitive research I was doing. One thing I noticed on the large national broadband providers sites that a lot of them have these quizzes where they will ask you how you use the internet. So tell me how many devices you have. Tell me what you typically do. Do you work from home? Do you stream? Do you game? And then they're going to make a suggestion for a particular tier. I saw this exact same thing when I was looking at a lot of the third-party Wi-Fi companies. So Eero or Netgear, these types of companies that potentially people are going out and buying these Wi-Fi systems. They'll ask similar things. How many devices do you have? How big is your house? How many levels is it? So they're asking these questions in a quiz format and then making a suggestion of what they think based on those answers the best solution for you is going to be. I think that's really effective. And I think more providers could be using something like that. So if you look around and you see that all of your competitors are doing some version of that, there's clearly a reason why they're doing it. And maybe you want to take a little bit of inspiration from that type of quiz and work it into your own website.
I think that's exactly it. There's nothing wrong with going out and looking for that inspiration. I mean, we browse, I don't want to say hundreds of websites a day, but we visit a lot of
probably a lot.
Web pages maybe, but everyone visits a lot of web pages and websites. So if there is something you see, just keep that in mind and think about how you can adapt that to your own website. Gabe's example was fantastic. So definitely just keep that in mind. And again, one thing I like to stress, if there is something you don't like, something that you just absolutely hate, make sure you note that too, because the last thing you want to do is if you're working with an agency or a web developer, is the last thing you want to do is run into something you don't like that you've already seen. So keep that in mind too.
Yeah.
One of the tools I like to use though, Gabe, is from HubSpot. It's called the Marketing Grader. And what it does is you can put your website in and it'll analyze the performance, SEO, security. It'll rate things from 0 to 100%. And then it'll give you tips on what you can improve. So for example, on the performance metric, it'll say what your page size is. It will say what the load time was. SEO, it'll say, hey, these pages have permission to index, Google and Bing, whatnot, they can come on and index this page. You've got these descriptions in, it'll rate everything. And if you miss any of these steps, it'll tell you. But the trick with this site is this tool, you can also put your competitor websites in here too and see what they're doing and how they're doing. Yeah. So
I was going to ask, is this a free tool from HubSpot?
It is free.
To pay for this one?
No, it is absolutely free, Gabe. We will put this
cool.
Definitely in the notes here. So feel free to reach out to Gabe and myself as well to get some additional information on this. But put your competitor website, if they're lacking in the SEO category, pick up and take that from them. Improve your own SEO. And the thing with this tool is do it on your website now. And then once you redesign your website, if you have maybe a staging site, whatever that URL is, do it on that one again. Improve this website. It's not just going to be a static tool saying, here's one analysis, goodbye. Continue to use this and make sure you make these improvements on your websites. And again, one cool thing on this site is it also looks at your mobile website. So when people visit your website from a mobile device, it'll tell you, is it optimized? Is it going to cause any issues? And that's one thing, I feel like we don't see this as much in 2022, Gabe, but I think in the past we had this issue of the website's great, but the mobile site is total trash. Not to throw, anyone under the bus here, name names, but Facebook's mobile website is absolute trash. I don't know if you visited that thing. And the problem with the Facebook mobile website is it's a different version than their desktop site. And then it's also different from the app. So they've got these 3 different user experiences pulling everyone in different directions. It doesn't make any sense. And I don't want to hit on Facebook all the time, but if they would have used the HubSpot tool, they would have avoided that. But really use this tool.
I feel like they probably could have afforded it too, but
Oh man, they probably have their own tool, but
yes, I'm sure they do.
But back to the point is use this tool on your own website, pre-design, post-design, and then use it on your competitors too. If you see they're lacking in SEO, if you see they're lacking in SEO or I guess any of these categories, you should make improvements to make sure you beat them out there. If they have long load times and giant page sizes, you work with your development team, see how you can improve that, because there's nothing more painful than going to a website and just it slowly loads. You've got the thought going through my head: is my Wi-Fi down? Is it my problem? Is it my phone? Is it
right.
the website? And, you're switching between 5G and Wi-Fi and trying to get the best connection, and it ends up being the website itself. So make sure that doesn't happen too. One thing I did
the
mention,
amount of time, just a couple of things to top up there, Zach. So just to follow up on your last point there around slow load times, people's patience for slow load times is incredibly short.
We like things yesterday. That's what I tell people.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, especially your generation. But, people just expect websites to load. It's not the dial-up days, where, it would tick, 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 and you would see these, images loading on the screen. That's just not how it is. So if your site isn't loading quickly, you're right. People are just going to bounce, and your bounce rate's going to be super high. One other thing I wanted to hit on your comment about the marketing grader and, kind of this before and after, because I think that was a really great point of, hey, this is where we were at before and this is where we were at after. One of the things that Kat and I talked about last week was this idea of marketing not getting a seat at the executive table sometimes in a lot of companies because for whatever reason, right? But this is a great way for you to have specific KPIs to take back to your leadership team and measurable things where you can say, look, these are the changes that we made, and these are the specific improvements that are the specific improvements that resulted from these changes that we made. So I feel like a lot of times marketing is kind of like, oh yeah, you're running some ads, maybe you're out, handed a big check to somebody, right? And there just isn't as much respect given to that part of the organization. Where if you can take it and say, hey, look, we ran this through an analysis. This was our score on our website that we got before. Now we went and we did all of these improvements, and now here's our score now. That's a really measurable thing that you can take back to your leadership team and remind them of the benefit that marketing is bringing to the organization.
Oh, absolutely, Gabe. I think you make a fantastic point with that. Is with this data, you're getting that before and after picture. So if you're, and one of the points I made earlier was, what are you trying to do? What's your goal? Are you trying to drive conversions, sales, leads, whatever that may be? Have that data too. So that's another great way to look at it. Before we get into how often you should actually do this redesign process, one thing in the redesign, when you look at establishing goals that you should look at, is what new functionality should I be adding? What's something new that I can add to my website? And Gabe, we've talked a lot about this in the past. Number one thing that comes to mind is blogs. I strongly believe that if you're doing a website redesign project, depending on your industry, I guess I'll give you that. If you don't have a blog or some kind of content that engages with visitors, you might be doing something wrong. But I feel like in most cases, there's something that you can put out there. There's information that you need to share as a business, whether it's a BSP or what have you. But having that blog format, and you don't have to call it a blog. When I did this, I called it a learning center. And each week we'd hop on and talk about at the time it was a new finance topic, whether it was an SBA loan or refinancing. We talk about something new. And we were a bank, and we never once called it a blog. We called it the Learning Center. And then we also had a separate one, again, same blog format, but we just called it In the Community. And we would just be highlighting different community organizations, promoting them. So you don't have to call it a blog, but think of new ways to add content into your website. Blogs, landing pages, shareable content, videos. You can share in blog posts too, but having something that you can share on social media, and then your subscribers, your customers, whoever can share as well. If you've been to a website, you've probably seen those social media buttons, share on Facebook, retweet, whatever. Something like that is fantastic to use too. Just make sure you use them appropriately, and you're not just sharing random spam content. But and the last thing too is, and we're going to dive into this here in a few minutes, but analytics. We've talked about Google Analytics. Hopefully by now you have something on your website that's tracking analytics. Google is the one we talk about the most. Just about everyone I interact with has Google Analytics, but there's so many other tools as well. We've got Clarity, we've got Hotjar. Gabe, I know you really like Clarity as well. It's a fantastic one, so we'll definitely talk about that. But look around, see these analytics tools. You've got the Facebook Pixel you can install on your website too. Just different things like that. If you're doing a new website, it's a perfect opportunity to integrate these now. And the thing with these is, if you wait, if you forget about these, if you delay, you're not going to have any of that data. So your new website's going to go live, and you're not going to have that in-depth insight onto how that website's doing. So get that on your website, get that on the top of your mind, and have that done.
Yeah, I'll put a plea out to people. So if you are thinking about redesigning your website, if this thought has crossed your mind, if it's been a few years since you've redesigned your website, whatever it may be, please just go install Microsoft Clarity or Hotjar. But as Zach said, I'm a big fan of Clarity for lots of reasons, not the least of which it's free, and it's got some compliance stuff that's already set up from a data perspective. But go install Clarity so that you can see this data and that you can make an educated decision around what those issues are. Because you're absolutely right, Zach, until you go and you take that snippet of code and stick it on your website, you have nothing. And you're just guessing around what's working and what isn't. So if the thought has crossed your mind that you think you need to do a website redesign, please just go install Clarity, let that data gather in the background. And within a month or two, you're going to have amazing and fantastic data to look at.
And we're going to dive into these tools here next that you can use.
Yeah, let's do it.
The big question I asked at the beginning was, how often should I be redesigning my website? And, Gabe, you made the joke, now if you're asking the question, but the number I see most often is every 2 to 3 years, you should be looking at your website not only like the actual design itself, but the functionality too. So these website redesign projects, keep in mind, 2 to 3 years. I can think of the websites I visited, excluding Facebook, because, well, we all know. But I would say just about every website I visit does some major redesign every 2 to 3 years. I think of the Apple website specifically. The navigation menu at the top has almost never changed. It's always been like that gray box at the top. But if you've noticed the past couple of years, Apple's pages on their website, it's really scrollable content. You scroll through it, the product images changes, the text moves, things animate. So it's a really immersive experience. But they didn't used to have that. It used to be, images, text, and so on. And Apple's one of the big ones that I think of as like the actual feel of the website hasn't changed too much. You still have that navigation at the top. But once you get into it, you notice how much it's changed. Facebook, I mentioned Facebook. Facebook, they've only changed their design like once, I think. And it was 2 years ago, maybe, when it went from like that blue to the kind of that white clean feel. They were a unique case. I mean, they've got billions of monthly active users. So it's not, as easy for them to just, flip a switch and be done. But every other website, make sure you're on the 2 to 3. If you're over 5 years right now, like you're definitely overdue, and we should have that discussion.
Yeah, no
but keep in mind, it's going to depend on your industry and whatnot. But if you haven't redesigned your website since 2020, I would strongly consider it.
Yeah, absolutely.
2020, is that 2 years ago? I can't believe that.
2020 is 2 years ago. Yeah.
Oh man, it feels like just yesterday.
Lots changed since then, and with how much things have changed over the last couple of years. If you haven't, if it's been since 2020, even more reason to probably take a fresh look at it, right?
I would argue, Gabe, that if you haven't changed your website since 2020, there have been so many shifts that you're like extremely overdue at this point. With everything shifting online and that user experience and that online retail shopping, whatever that may be. If you don't have that kind of experience, back in COVID, when I did my last redesign, we integrated live chat into our website. People couldn't come in to talk to us. They either had to call us call us. So we added live chat so they could just quickly hop on and send us a message. And that was one of the features we did. We adapted our website to accommodate, the current event. So keep in mind, you don't just redesign your websites every 2 to 3 years. You can add, tweak things in between. But that website hadn't been redesigned since 2011. So you can imagine the mess I was cleaning up. But Dave, one of the things we talked about a little bit was the tools. We've mentioned Clarity.
Yes.
We've mentioned Hotjar a little bit. But one of the things I just want to bring up before we jump into those tools is when you design your website, there's tools you can use to mock up your website and kind of give it that visual. One of the ones I used was I kind of designed a site in Adobe Illustrator. I'm a big Adobe fan, so that was like my go-to. I designed this thing in Illustrator, and then I uploaded it into a UX mockup tool that I've used. And Gabe, I've shared this tool with you. The name is escaping me, so if you remember the tool name, let me know. But once you have your mockup, you can upload these images or these screenshots or whatever you have, or you can actually build it in the app. And then you can add little clickable boxes so people can interact with the design as if they were, interacting with a live site. And that's really a design phase. It's not live. You're still kind of, designing it. So that's one tool I'd like to use. And I cannot think of the name. It totally escapes me, but we'll put that in the show notes as well. It escapes my
brain too. But
it's fantastic.
It'll come to me at like 3:00 this morning, and I'll wake up screaming it. But I don't remember off the top of my head either.
Oh man. But the other one, Gabe, is, and this is one that you can install on your website, line of code, this one's Hotjar specifically. And what this one does is it generates heat maps. It records actual user sessions. So you can see, where the mouse is going, what are they clicking on? And then you can also use it to collect feedback and build surveys right into your website. So you can get that little pop up on the bottom right or wherever you put it. And you can say, hey, how could this page improve? Something simple like that, and people can leave their feedback. But if you're not listening to customer feedback when you're redesigning your website, that's what is that, problem zero here, Gabe? I feel like I've established a few problems and mistakes today, but you've got to listen to that feedback. So if you're not collecting it, collect it. You definitely need to understand how people are using your website and what they would like to see.
Yeah, I'm nodding my head vigorously because yes, absolutely. You need to be collecting that data during the design phase and pre-design phase to understand where those issues are. you mentioned a bunch of great features that are available in Hotjar. Same thing in Clarity. That heat maps. Most visited pages. One of the other ones that I love is scroll depth. Being able to understand how deep people are scrolling into the page, which, as we've talked about, is shockingly little.
I really want to see the scroll data on Apple's website. I mentioned, you can scroll through, but like if you go to like the iPhone page or whatever page, like I feel like you scroll like 2 miles, like, and I'm really interested to know, because I personally, this is my opinion, I don't like that experience too much. I like, quick information, but Apple gets away with it just because they have, a fantastic
Yeah, because they're
website.
Apple, right? They've built up enough credibility. I'm sure their scroll depth is a lot greater than most companies.
Yeah.
I think most companies, if it's not in that top section, above the fold, people are they're not gonna scroll down. From what I've seen, in most cases, 50 to 60% of people are gonna fall off below the fold. So if you've got content below the fold, 60% of your users or your visitors are probably not going to see it.
That's fantastic. But yeah, Gabe, I used Hotjar a little bit. One thing I do like to point out is when you use Hotjar, when you're collecting that feedback, if I'm planning to redesign my website October this year and then go live in January 2023, I want that feedback today. I want to know what people think of my. I don't want to wait until November. I don't want to wait till my new website launches. I want that feedback today. So collect that feedback early. Make sure you understand what people are saying and what they'd like to see. One of the big things on the feedbacks I got was people wanted to do different, like, open accounts online and fill out different documents and forms online, and instead of coming into the bank and doing that. So that's one of the things we did. We did just that. We listened to that feedback. You can apply for a home loan right on our website and work directly with one of the lenders. So you can do all of that digitally now. I actually saw a post on Instagram last night, and it was something along the lines of, I went to the bank and picked up checks and, might ride my horse into, the office tomorrow or whatever, just kind of making a comment on how, like, nobody does that traditional I shouldn't say nobody, but, when you're coming to a
very
website,
few people, you
need to have the functionality. People are coming to your website. They're digitally inclined, hopefully, but if they're coming to your website, they expect, that digital retail experience. If there's something that they have to come into the office for, maybe consider, is there a way we can do that on the website? I think of like bill payment. Like, imagine like having to mail a check to pay a bill versus, doing it on your website. Like, that's one of my favorite examples. Is I will never like write a check and pay someone if I can do it on their website. So going back to that comment earlier, is what's the new functionality on your website? Don't just redesign, add additional functionality. So just think of different ways your customers engage with your business today and how you can bring that to your digital storefront.
Well, and think about how your target market is changing. Zach's age group is now financial decision makers. So they've grown up with a 100% digital economy. So if your website is not set up for Zach and people like Zach who want to engage with you in a digital way, you're behind. And you need to really be thinking about, that particular group of folks, that are just looking for a completely different way to engage. One of the other tools or resources I would highly recommend is doing actual user research. And there are great companies out there. There's companies out there that you can go and pay to do this research for you. And if you're spending, $10,000 or probably more on a website redesign project, it probably makes sense to throw a few $100 at some user research. And what these companies will do is they will actually, you tell them, here's the demographics of the group that I want to go test my website. They will go out and they will find people that fit those demographics. And then they will pay them to go through your website. They will record the sessions and they will determine if people were able to successfully do the thing that you wanted them to do. So you can say, hey, I want this outcome. Was this person actually able to go and do it? And yes, is it going to cost you a little bit of money? Yeah, it is going to cost you a little bit of money. A few $100, maybe even a couple $1,000s, depending on how many of these tests that you do. But the information and the insight that you get from that is going to be so valuable in that overall project that, to me, it is totally worthwhile to, go out, find one of these organizations that does this. Just go to Google and Google user testing, and there's going to be a bunch of options that come back and, really help you understand how a real user is going to interact with your website, with the changes that you'd like to make. And maybe do it even to Zach's point, maybe even do it before you actually do the website redesign project as well. So you have all that information around the challenges that currently exist, so you can figure out how to address those, as you move forward.
Gabe, this whole podcast episode just needs a part 2. I think there's so much we could talk about, and I feel like this was a good introduction. This episode was good on everything of like, how do I begin this process? What should I be thinking of? So keep in mind everything we talked about today. If you're doing a website redesign that's coming up soon, go back, listen, look at these tools we talked about. But we'll be back with a part 2 on this one. I'm quite confident. So stay tuned for that. But if you haven't listened to last week's episode with Kat and Gabe, oh, absolutely. So yeah, go back, listen to last week's episode with Kat and Gabe if you missed that. She's a fantastic guest host as well. And then we talk about a little bit of the hot jar a little bit too, but just different strategies too. But again, we'll come back with part 2 on this one. I know we have a lot more to talk about, but I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Make sure you give Gabe and I a follow on LinkedIn and connect with us. And then make sure you follow the podcast as well. We have a video podcast on Spotify as well as uploaded to YouTube, but you can give us a follow on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for following us today, guys. We'll be back with part 2 on websites soon.